Thank you for watching the video on critical thinking. Let's talk about that a little bit because it's very important in our lives, everyday lives. So when we look at something, we tend to have a thought about it, have an opinion about it. Not always, but most of the time. So one of the things you'll see in this little chart about critical thinking, which is the application of rational thinking, it's using logic um, and applying it to what you do or believe. So when you look at this, the objective reflection, if you ever hear someone say, oh, you're not being objective, we want to think about that because objectivity is difficult. We already have our values and our belief systems in place, and part of being objective is sort of setting those aside temporarily to look at something. And sometimes that can be difficult, so we may have to actually question some of our preconceived notions to really be able to reflect on what we read or what we saw or what we heard. So the next part is understand. We have to understand something to actually break it down into parts, to actually critically, uh, really examine whatever it is we're doing. So examining logical connections in a text or speech or somewhere else. For instance, if someone's in a speech and this, you might hear this or see it visually. Someone says, "Hey, everybody's doing it, right? You need to buy these because everybody's wearing these, or you need to act like this because everyone's doing this." That is where you really have to think about, do I understand what's going on? And is it logical? Is there this logical connection? Does it make sense? So if, for instance, if there's a pandemic and we're all being asked to wear masks and nobody's wearing them, then is there an inconsistency there? Does it make sense? And vice versa, if we're being asked to do something that doesn't make sense in terms of what the circumstances are, then you really have to really examine inconsistencies and ask yourself, does it make sense? Now, the next part is really identifying things. And some of these have some overlap, but they're really important and it's hard to completely separate the pieces here. So I just want you to understand the overall idea of this is really breaking things apart. So you're going to examine the importance of ideas to you, a community, and the world. So as I say in this section, it's not all about you, right? So it's about you, the larger community, and ultimately, how does something apply to the world? How relevant is it? How much does it matter to you? How much does it matter to your community? And maybe if it doesn't matter in your community, how much does it matter to the world? Because sometimes those worldly connections might apply to the community later, even if they're not applying to the community, which you are in the community and it might affect you. So you really have to identify some of these things. And one of the things is it current? So if we're looking at an article, say, uh, in the medical field, you're going to have to make sure that that information is current and relevant, right? So you can't treat a new sickness with something that's been proven dangerous, right? So that might be an example of looking at and identifying, is it current, is it relevant? The next one, evaluate. Look at evaluate here. Critical thinking can be used to not only evaluate, but also what you're going to be doing, depending on how you're handling. You're going to be doing it in terms of writing, but also you do it in life. So it helps you construct effective arguments. If you're arguing for more funding for a program, you're really having to think about um, critically thinking about a problem and how it looks, what you can do to sort of affect that problem. So you're really evaluating something. Being able to examine closely, understand, evaluate, examining preconceived notions can all help solve major problems. So in case you don't know that, that's part of how problem solving goes. There are actually steps to problem solving that we won't cover in this, but all of these things go together. So I'm going to show you an example of that. We're actually going to look at a news story together and let's talk about some of these concepts in real life. Okay, so this was just found by doing a simple search for news, and we're going to just have a quick look at this. I want you to recognize a few things here. These are just some of the stories. I just put in like news, current news. So a lot of politics stuff is going on. But we're going to look at some of the language here. So we've got the word defy. So defy and disagree are slightly different when you think in terms of what they mean when they hit your ears. Um, there are, um, let's see here, why 2020 Senate Republicans will vote against impeachment. Um, Stares down. So John Roberts is staring down someone. And of course, when people are doing stories, they're trying to get people to read them. So you have to make them, interesting. And that's what's going on here. But it's also called biased language. You should be picking up on that from hopefully you've heard of biased language before. It's like that language that sort of gives it a slant. It's not neutral. It's obviously not objective, which is something that we just talked about. Another thing you can see here, Michael Bloomberg goes full Trump troll. Troll is, that's a really impactful word there in his new golf ad. So you can see some stuff going on here with the way things are worded, which is something you really have to recognize when you start examining sources to use for research. So let's see, let's just pick, let's see here, let's just pick rock. So see, this says impeachment trial to end, but its aftershocks will rock America. Now, obviously, this is older. It's from January of 2020, but we're still going to look at it. Okay, so whenever you're looking at sources, I really want you to be cognizant of. I'm sure I can get the ad for. Hold on a second, it's going to play for me. Okay, sorry about that. So I really want you to be cognizant of, hey, what does this look like? Now, you saw, it's gone now, but you saw that his face, he had a unique expression that looks upset on his face. And as you move on down here through the story, it has America's latest national nightmare, right? So news is not going to be one of those things that you're going to consider um, to be a valid source. And these are some of the reasons why. Now, this is not an attack on CNN. I actually watch all news, and I tell students, if you are going to learn anything from a class that focuses on argument, please learn to question everything. That does not, if you are into politics, watch both sides with an open mind. If you're not, that's fine too. But if you're reading a source, don't believe the first thing you read. Okay, so I know that we have some different views depending on what news source you read in this country, and I won't go into my personal views, but I watch everything or listen to everything or read every side. So to really be able to effectively argue, you have to do that. You can't just pick a side and start arguing, especially in this class. So what I will tell you is that anything that you say, if you had told me America's latest national nightmare will not end when Republicans vote to acquit President Donald Trump of high crimes and misdemeanors, possibly as early as Friday. Okay, if you actually had written this in your paper, one thing that I would say is, hey, first of all, this is loaded language. This emotional language that brings out um, feelings when people say it. It's a little more subjective. So I would say, how do you define national nightmare? Define that for me. Has to have a definition. It has to have sources to back it up, to say credible sources, to say what that actually means when they say that. So this is just one of many examples. Now this does have a link that goes to stuff, and typically what happens in news is your sources are cited in links, right? So if you're discussing something and you say it, usually it'll be cited in links. Now, one of the things I want you to look for, though, and we're going to talk about this in the research video, because critical examination, especially of now critical thinking is the whole process, right? You're understanding it, you're thinking about it objectively, you're saying, is it logical? There's a whole train of things that you're doing there. But critical examination of a source is right in alignment with that. You're going to look, does this make sense? Is it logical? Now, even though something might be true or false, it could be true, even if it's that way, it has to make logical sense. It has to have support behind it. So anything that you're looking for in this class will always have that. If you make a statement that's opinion, now um, you're going to have evidence to back it up. Okay, an expert, and it has to be a true expert. Um, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the research one. So I think it's deciding to make me sign up for a newsletter. But I'll get off this part and we'll go back to just the reference page of the PowerPoint just so you can see the reference. Otherwise, you can stop the video here or you can watch the source that I gave you, and we'll talk more about sources in the research part. So I'm not going to make this big into the slideshow again, but here's the resource used if you're interested. Thank you for listening.